doing it. So you got a notification that says start. Oh, you got a notification that says Yuri's recording the call.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, then we're good to go. Okay, well, everyone, welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. We are rejoined by our returning champion, frequent guest, friend of the shows, Margaret Kimberley. Margaret is the senior columnist of Black Agenda Report. She's a member of Black Alliance for Peace and all sorts of other wonderful social justice, racial justice, anti-imperialist organizations, and she's our guest for the hour. So Margaret, first of all, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming back on the program.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Always an honor to talk to you, Margaret. And Margaret, the first thing I want to talk to you about, and of course I have this prepared, which is unfortunately I invite you under very sad circumstances, and I just want to express my sorrow over the loss of your friend, who was the executive editor of Black Agenda Reports, Glen Ford. And would you like to tell our audience, some who may not be familiar with the wonderful work and activism of Glen Ford, and can you talk to us about his legacy, what he meant to, and if you'd like, what he meant to you personally outside of Black Agenda Reports, when you both weren't, collaborating on doing the fearless truth-telling and myth-busting journalism and activism that of course you were both part of?
Well, Glenn was, first of all, he was an old school reporter. He was a real journalist. We've got talking heads, we've got news readers, but Glenn was of that generation that reported the news, that analyzed, that questioned what they were told, who did not accept the official narrative. In fact, from his point of view as a socialist, a true socialist, he was rightly skeptical of the official narratives he was given. And just to tell you a little about his life, because I think it explains a lot about what he did.
And it's a fascinating life he led.
Yes, it is. He was, this is my favorite, well, there's several favorite Glenn stories, but I don't know if your viewers are aware, in 1949, Paul Robeson and others were attacked by a right-wing mob as they prepared to perform in Peekskill, New York. And it was the beginning of the end of Robeson's career. They took his passport, they ruined his life. But at any rate, 1949, September, this riot broke out. He had been misquoted. He had gone to a conference in Paris. He talked about how the U.S. should have a friendship with the Soviet Union, all very reasonable things. His words were twisted, and he was called a traitor, and this mob of people attacked him and others. And Glenn told, as he was, I knew the story, he said, yes, I was there. I was in my mother's belly. His mom was there, and he was born 2 months later. So Glenn came into the world as a socialist. And his mother was quite the political activist. He spent part of his childhood in Jersey City, New Jersey, and part in Georgia during the days of segregation, of America's apartheid. His father was in media. He had a radio show, one of the first Black people to have a radio show in Georgia. And Glenn was on the air literally when he was a kid. So his father had him reading the news when he was 10 years old or something like that. So he came from these roots of left-wing activism and media. So he, when he was an adult, he joined the Army. When he left the Army, he went into media as well, but he never forgot his roots as a socialist. And I think because he grew up in in the South during the days of segregation, he always put Black people at the forefront of his thinking. He was no reductionist who dismissed the impact of racism. That was not Glen at all. He was, to use the old, I don't know if you know this term, a race man, as Black people used to say, meaning a Black person who was concerned primarily with the condition of Black people. And so he was a Marxist who was not a reductionist, who was a defender of Black people. He never had criticisms of the masses of Black people, ever. He wasn't one to say we should do this better or do that differently or pull yourself up by your bootstraps or it's our fault that this thing happened. You would never hear that from him. He also was in the military. You know, a lot of leftists were in the military, especially in those days. There was a draft. It was something very, Glen was 71, so he was, it was in the late 60s. During the Vietnam War era, he was in the military. Yeah. And I think that also formed his thinking, having had that experience when he spoke of foreign policy, spoke of interventions. He was speaking very personally of someone who had those experiences. Then he worked for James Brown in Georgia. James Brown owned radio stations in Georgia and other places. So who was the one who told him his name was Rutherford? He said he should shorten it to Ford. And there was an actor, an old white actor, Glen Ford, two N's, Glen, spelled slightly differently. But at any rate, I'm sure that was part of his thinking as well. Glen became a Black Panther at a young age, as many leftists were in those days. And he continued working professionally in media for the Mutual Black Network. He and a man named Peter Gamble started a radio show called Black America. I
think America's Black Forum or one of them.
Thank you. I'm transposing the names. First syndicated show, public affairs, dedicated to Black people, and he was in the music business. He had a music program, but he never strayed from his political roots. And when I first met him in the early O's, although I wrote for him for a couple years before I actually met him, which was very funny, Black Commentator, he and Peter Gamble, the same Peter, formed Black Commentator. And I started writing in 2003 with my first foray, and he encouraged me to keep writing. And that's another thing about Glen. He was always encouraging people who may not have been experienced to express themselves and to learn to write and to learn to present their points of view. We left Black Commentator in 2006 and formed Black Agenda Report. Myself and Glen and the late Bruce Dixon. So it's almost 15 years of Black Agenda Report. He's about to have a book published. Unfortunately, he didn't live to see it. It's called The Black Agenda, and it's published by Or Books. And it's a compilation of his greatest journalistic hits, and that's going to be published in about a month. But people can pre-order now. Go to orbooks.com.
Oh, fantastic! And it'll definitely be on my list of books I need to get ASAP, not wait till Christmas or my next birthday. And
so like an overview of Glen's life and how it impacted his work.
Well, he led a very his life is very fascinating. In fact, I mean, normally once I put an episode up, I always put a whole bunch of links that if the readers are interested, they should check out these links. And a couple of episodes ago, I did post some of my favorite speeches of Glen, but I definitely am going to try to one of these days, because I have way too much free time, to do a playlist of like my favorite interviews of Glen, my favorite speeches of Glen, because he was an amazing journalist, an amazing media critic who went, people like him and then others like, Whitney Webb and Max Blumenthal and his team at the Gray Zone, then, Ronnie Akalik and so forth. What I really like about, them and Eve Engler is they go beyond the Chomsky, the Chomsky-Herman model of corporate media as the root of all evil. Glen, called out those on the enemies within the left and within the black left, the black misleadership class, and those and those on the mainly white left who jumped the shark on foreign policy. I know your team, we've talked about how you're all one of the few outlets to push back against Obama's propaganda, against the war in Syria, the anti-Russia hysteria, the war for oil in Venezuela. So that's what I really liked about Glen and the team that you have with Danny Haifong and Ann Garrison, the late Bruce Dixon, and it's a huge loss to the racial justice movement, the anti-imperialist movement, and the broad people power movements. Him not here anymore. And do you want to talk a bit about that? Reflect on some of the stuff I just said.
Yeah, he was a staunch anti-imperialist. Very, he did not waver. And as far as Obama goes, Glenn, basically, none of us did. We did not change our politics because there was a black president. We had the same critique, the same analysis. We made the same points about the role the U.S. plays in the world, about neoliberalism, which had taken over the Democratic Party. All of these are things that we had said before 2008, and none of us changed our politics, as some people did when Obama ran and then became president. And, Obama, I guess if I had to sum up, he did what presidents do. You don't get to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. I seem to recall that in 2008, Obama raised 10 times as much as John McCain, his opponent. Yeah, I mean, that is an indication of where, of whose interests were going to be protected, whose interests would be advocated for when he became president, just like everybody else. So Glenn would say that Obama and the Democrats were not the lesser evil that we're always taught to support. They were just the more effective evil, because they could get away with things just like other Democrats did. It's Bill Clinton who got rid of public assistance, welfare as we know it. You had a right to public assistance from the time of FDR, from the 1930s. He got rid of that. He's the one who got rid of regulations regarding the media. So you had hundreds of media companies. Now there's 6 corporations which control almost everything we see and read and hear. So that's the function that Democrats perform, and Obama wasn't any different. So he bailed out the banks. Trillions of dollars went to the banks. He bailed out Wall Street, financial services, but did not bail out the people, like black people who lost what little wealth they had, and mostly in home ownership during the real estate bubble. So a foreign policy, I remember when he ran in 2008, he said, "I'm not against all wars, just dumb wars," meaning he wasn't going to send U.S. troops anywhere. So they used Islamist proxies in Libya and destroyed Libya. Tried to do the same thing in Syria. And those were the things that Glenn really excelled. And I learned a lot from him. I thought I was very, well informed before I met him, and I realized there were a lot of things I did not know because I didn't have I had not been, like most people, my education was deficient. These are things that you're not taught. These are things that the New York Times and Washington Post aren't going to tell you. So I'm a better person, better informed person for having known Glenn and worked with him all those years. And so he was a mentor and a friend and an educator, and he really changed my life. I don't know anybody outside of my family who had that kind of influence. The fact that I'm talking to you internationally, that I'm invited to speak in other countries and around this country, that's all because of Glen Ford and the confidence he placed in me, and his dedication to bringing new voices into the fold and helping people establish their voice. I think you can say that too.
And can you also reflect on the legacy of Bruce Dixon? Because I remembered I wanted to invite you, either during Black History Month or just sometime to do a show, especially dedicated to the legacy of Bruce Dixon. And for me, what was so sad about hearing Glen's passing was that it's not too long ago that Bruce Dixon sadly passed away, battling cancer, and to lose two great giants, Black leftists who are who are revolutionary socialists at home and anti-imperialists abroad, and they're not selectively anti-war, as you mentioned. They're consistently anti-war. NGO critics. So can you reflect also on the legacy of Bruce Dixon?
Sure. Bruce passed 2 years ago. He and Glen were the same age, that same generation. Bruce was from Chicago. He had a similar political trajectory. He was also a Black Panther in Chicago, knew Fred Hampton. And he did not join the military, however. I think that's like the biggest difference between them politically. But he was also a committed leftist. He was a member, though, of the Green Party. And I'm now a member of the Green Party, I think because of Bruce. Because I would, when there was a Green Party candidate to vote for, I would. But he was the first person who encouraged me to really to leave the Democrats, and it's difficult because they're presented as this only option. But Bruce would always point out that, for example, the minimum wage is very low here. The federal minimum wage is just a little over $7. And Bruce pointed out that when Obama first became president and he controlled both houses of Congress, the Democrats could have raised the minimum wage, but they raised these issues when they can't do anything about them. So when Republicans are in office, they'll claim they want to raise the minimum wage. Then when they get control, they don't do anything about it. And he said it was like professional wrestling. And I steal that line. I still use it all the time. And he talked about trying to build a left party in this country, which is no easy thing. That was so Bruce. I also learned a lot from him. And by anybody who wants to listen to them, if you go on YouTube and you just search for their names, you can hear them give speeches or commentary. We have Black Agenda Report. Our website's admittedly not the best at searching for articles, but there's enough there if you search for their names.
Yeah, and I'm definitely gonna do a playlist of like my favorite Glen Ford interviews and speeches, sure, and try to find a lot on Bruce Dixon, because Bruce Dixon was also incredible.
Yes, he was. He was also incredible, very kind person too, and he sadly they both succumbed to cancer. I think Bruce was 69, Glen was 71, around the same age. Bruce's cancer was occupationally related. It was now I can't remember it, but it was something that people who worked in foundries. He worked in factories in Chicago, and that's where his illness began.
Wow!
Yeah. Yeah,
and before I get to my to my third question, what was if you'd like to share, what was Glen's sense of humor like? Like, what was he like outside of we're done making our speeches for the day. We're done writing our articles for the day. Let's try to relax for a bit and just shoot the barrels. Like what was he like? What was he and Bruce like when not, when not doing Black Agenda reports or the many activisms that you guys do across the country?
Yeah, Bruce I didn't get to spend a lot of time with because he lived in Atlanta. And so I saw him, we had a couple of fundraisers, bar fundraisers here in New York. Saw him at Left Forum for a few years, a couple conferences. So I'm going to say I saw Bruce in person maybe 10 times, 10 different occasions I would see him. And he was, Bruce was also an organic farmer. So he lived near Atlanta. He had a farm. He had pictures in Facebook of his melons or his potatoes or whatever he was growing. And I used to joke that when the apocalypse came, I would have to try to get to Georgia so I could survive. But Glen, he had a very serious side, but when you got to meet him, so he could come off as a hard person, but he was a caring person. He cared about people. In the abstract, he cared about people, and in his personal interactions, he was a caring person. So sometimes he had a gruff exterior, but that was okay. That was okay with me. He was a good guy. He was a good guy.
I have to share this story. I would have not got into journalism actually if it wasn't for Glen. Ford. I didn't complete the university, which I'm not going to get into because it's way too long of a story. But anyways, university didn't work out for me, and there was a lot of mental health reasons why it didn't work out, lots of financial reasons why it didn't work out. And I, was job hunting, here and there, seeing what I can, do for whatever outlet. And I remember obsessively getting into Black Agenda reports and Min Press News. And I thought to myself, okay, well, you have no journalism experiences. You have no journalism degrees. All you can really do, Youri, is try to probably interview people. And if you can do a Facebook interview, send it to somebody. Maybe they'll publish it on their website. So I had contacted, Glen Ford. I finally had the courage to sort of email him and ask him, are you hiring anyone? And if you are hiring anyone, does that person need a degree? And then kind of offered up two things. I offered up, I would love to do interviews that, on behalf of Black Agenda Report. And there's a Labor Party conference, and, tried to summarize all of the different, chaos that was happening with the Corbyn project. And I said to him that I would love to cover the Labor Party conference for Black Agenda reports, and he said, "Okay, try to do those, try to find those, seek out those interviews, send them to me, and we'll see what we can do from there." And then he basically gave me his blessing to be a reporter for Black Agenda Report to cover the Labor Party conference, and I have this, which is my press pass, with Black Agenda, with Black Agenda Report. So I did cover the Labor Party conference for BAR. Unfortunately, unfortunately, due to years of not being in school and not practicing writing, I completely just did not know how to do, short, succinct articles and so forth like that, and was very frustrated with that. Didn't want to talk to Glen about, some of my past histories with mental health issues. So unfortunately, things kind of just, things just kind of ended like that. But then I thought to myself, well, I did two interviews on behalf of BAR, Rick Sterling on all things Syria, Eve Engler on all things Canada. So I thought to myself, well, I've made some contacts at the Labor Party conference. Why not just do an interview program? And if possible, maybe even try to get Glen and the Black Agenda Report team to come on the program to do those interviews. So that's actually how I started, 1+1. I mean, even though things didn't work out in the end in terms of articles being published or interviews being published for BAR, I think if not for Glen, he at least instilled the confidence in me that, like, okay, you're a terrible writer, but you're a very good interviewer. You'll probably be a very good, reporter if you can find the means to do that. And so that's how 1+1 started. And then that's when I, got the courage to contact you to talk about, your book, Preach You Gentle. And then I thought to myself, I've already been doing the program for a year. It's Black History Month coming up. And then I, asked Glen, if he would do me the honors to come on the program to talk about anything and everything. But then that was when he said to me that unfortunately can't do it because of the health reasons. And so unfortunately I never got the chance to do a recorded interview with them.
Well, it's interesting. That's I had a similar story. When at Black Commentator, I wrote about Condoleezza Rice. This was like around the time of the Iraq War. And I said, I want to write something. He said, okay. He always said, okay. And he was very impressed. He said he didn't need a lot of editing. And then he said, you want to write some more? And he asked me to write every week. He did warn me, however, he said it's difficult to write every week, to always have something meaningful to say, which was true. But I plunged in and I did it every week for years. But that was typical of him. And I don't have a journalism degree. I never worked in media. He would say yes and show me what you've got. And, the answer might not always be yes, depending on the person's skill, but he was always encouraging, always. He did not, he was not impressed with people because they had journalism degrees. He used to say all they did was train people to repeat the official narrative. And he said journalism school ought to just tell people how to write, teach them grammar, and that was it. Because basically they were just establishment spokespeople. So he was not one who was impressed with those sorts of things anyway. He didn't go to college. He joined the Army as a teenager. And then went into media as I just described. So yeah, he would have. I can well imagine him saying, I don't care if you don't have a university degree. Just show me what you can do. So that's typical, actually quite typical of him. And he gave a lot of people a chance. I just really stuck with it, and I would not be a published author if it weren't for Glen. That was a dream I had as a young person. I'd like to write a book, but at all these connections, all these things happened to me. And that's the other thing to remember, that I think hard work, sticking with something really pays off. And I don't mean in that conservative, pull yourself up by your bootstraps if you don't succeed because you didn't work hard. I don't mean like that. I mean when you have a goal, when you practice something over and over and over again, that you will eventually meet with success. Now, the way our system works, it's difficult for people to do that. How do you survive? How do you, so I've struggled I have to have full-time jobs. I can't survive on this. So it's difficult to go to, I remember I was invited to Russia in December 2014, and then to come back on Sunday, and I'm right back to work. So whatever I was feeling about having seen Moscow, I had to put it out of my head and get back to my day job. And wow. That's difficult. It's challenging, I'll put it that way. But so I try to encourage people. I try to tell people it doesn't matter if you have a degree in journalism or a degree at all. Glen was largely self-taught, and he was a very, very knowledgeable person. More than I was with my college degree. So Bruce too, both of them. And I think that's because like most people, my education was lacking in the issues that they knew about. Socialist history, world history, the real story of World War II, all kinds of things. So I think all of us are undereducated in a way, especially if you have a conventional education. So so yeah, that's something I want to emulate in him, and try to give people the help they need to do the same thing.
Yeah, he made me be proud to be a black. He made me be proud to be a black person again, actually, because I think I remember telling you, when you're a black person, and you mostly are going to white schools and you're being taught a white narrative, even if you have the best leftish sort of teacher, like they'll prop up Martin Luther King Jr., but they'll
Yeah.
shit on Malcolm X, and they'll ignore Paul Robeson, and they'll ignore Ida B. Wells, who was the first black muckraker. She's the one that really did get into the reasons why we have the epidemics of lynchings and black pogroms and in the U.S. So listening to Glenn, it's just fascinating. And of course, I had people who say to me, you're a self-hating black person not supporting Obama, within
Well,
my own, and then to see somebody like Glenn Ford, this wonderful articulate black person with this cool, long hair that he keeps in the ponytail, eviscerating Obama, saying all the things that I had a problem with Obama, but I just had a very time articulating because he gets so marginalized. For me, Black Agenda Reports and reading your work and Garrison's superb journalism on Congo, Rwanda, and pushing back against all of the propaganda that happened on my mom's country of Congo Zaire. For me, it was like, wow, I actually can aspire to be like a black leftist journalist. So I no longer have to aspire to be like the black John Pilger or the black Matt Taibbi. I want to be a journalist like Glen Ford, Margaret, Kimberley, Bruce Dixon. So that's any thoughts on that?
Well, it's funny you say that. It was it's coming. So much time has gone by, right? 2008, 13 years since Obama's first campaign. But it was a difficult time for Black people who were consistently leftist. It was very hard because we were all being sheep herded into, and the marketing of the Obama campaign was amazing, that he was marketed as this progressive when he was the usual neoliberal and imperialist.
I call him a boring, uninspiring, centrist windbag.
Ain't much. And so it was a difficult time. And speaking of being marginalized, nobody was allowed to criticize Obama. A lot of white people, anybody who wanted to maintain that leftist political stance was marginalized then. It was especially difficult for Black people because you're supposed to be so happy, friends, relatives. I mean, I made a personal decision not to fall out with anybody over some politician, but it remains difficult. And a lot of the opposition to him was racist. Yeah, there were people who just didn't want a Black president.
No doubt. Yeah.
So that also made it difficult to offer any critique, but we stuck to our guns. And that's the other reason we need solidarity. It's difficult to do these things by ourselves. It's difficult to stand out alone. So even if you're not physically in the same place with people, just to know that they exist, that they're there, was huge. So Black Agenda Report really has had a huge impact on left politics and Black left politics and internationally. And I'm very, very proud of that. But I would say Glenn is the one, most responsible for making that happen. And his commitment, his dedication, when he was sick, the last month of his life, he put the last couple of issues together from his hospital bed. He had a laptop in his hospital. And he would, I and others spoke to his daughter. She would say, okay, suppose we don't publish this week. It'll be okay. He didn't want to hear it. Because, and it gave him something to live for and gave him optimism. So I realized later that that's what he wanted to do for as long as for however much time he had left.
Yeah, and we have, and also have to give a shout out to Solomon Kamajong, the editor and founder of Your World's News, who did us, who I'm definitely going to put all of Solomon's interviews with Glen there, because it's great seeing those two speak to each other. And Solomon recorded probably the best election autopsy a journalist ever gave when Trump won, and the terrible state of affairs with with the new Cold War on Russia. And it's a speech, there is no lesser evilism, something like that, which I'll definitely put in the show notes on top of the playlist that I'll do of Glen Ford, and people definitely need to check that out. So we have to give a shout out to the brilliant Solomon Kamajong. And can you briefly, if possible, talking about the politics of Black Agenda Report, can you briefly, if you can, give an assessment of the U.S. NATO withdrawal on Afghanistan? And there was a tweet of mine that you and Arnold August and several others shared, which is the still ongoing imperial blind spots, the Western do-goodism, the white person's burden theory that many left-leaning folks have regarding Afghanistan, and how this relates to the new Cold Wars on Russia, China, and of course, the ongoing civil war with Ukraine, and of course the Western-backed Hong Kong, Xinjiang separatists, as well as the misery that Syria is still going through.
Sure. Glen in our current issue of Black Agenda Report, I write about Afghanistan, and we also reprinted something Glen wrote back in 2012 about Afghanistan and how it was emblematic of American racism. This idea that people who aren't European are less than human. So for 20 years, the U.S. has occupied that country. Something like more than 60,000 civilians killed in that conflict, killed because of the U.S. Invasion. And those things were not discussed the way we discuss them at Black Agenda Report. So the story of Afghanistan really goes back to the late 70s. There was a left-wing government. They asked the Soviet Union for help. We were told that the Soviets invaded and gas attacks and all lies, in other words. But the U.S. backed these jihadists who became the Taliban. They were the Mujahideen, who were the good guys at the time, including Osama bin Laden. Millions of dollars, now trillions of dollars. And that was the beginning of using jihadists as America's foot soldiers. That was the first time. And after 9/11, Osama bin Laden, who had been America's friend, but if you look at my column, I point out, he said, well, we didn't really care about Russia. We really wanted to support our Muslim brothers. So I'm paraphrasing the quote. But so after the 2001 September 11th terror attacks, there's only one member of Congress. Her name is Barbara Lee. She represents part of the Bay Area in California. She was the only one to vote against this military intervention. And ever since then, every Afghanistan president has been chosen by the U.S. The U.S. Spent millions. It really is several $1 trillion. Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, all these defense contractors made a killing, but as well. Yeah, but because you don't have this honesty about what the U.S. was doing, people are confused, and I really think just embarrassed. So people see the people who are hanging onto planes, trying to get out of Kabul, and they're just embarrassed because it's bad optics. But the press would just not report on Afghanistan for months and months at a time. The last time they said anything a year ago was to claim that Russians were paying for bounties on U.S. troops, which was all a lie. But nothing about the disruption, nothing about the carnage, the refugees, the way that Afghanistan has really been, its development has been, it's underdeveloped because of the U.S., because of U.S. and NATO interventions. And if you read Black Agenda Report, you know those things. And the U.S. should be out of Afghanistan, but my fear is they are taking American troops out to send them somewhere else. And I think to try to, and what a disaster that would be, to try to fight China. But this tells us who's a leftist and who is not. And so when people say, well, I'm worried about women in Afghanistan, and this is the way we've been taught to look at the world. If women have to wear a hijab, it's the worst thing ever. And you see pictures of women wearing mini skirts back in the 60s, and that's not the measure of how well people are doing. It just isn't. But when people fall back on those tropes, the human rights trope, with this assumption that the U.S. and these other nations that practice brutality are the measure of civilization.
Yeah.
So when people reject that, you know who a leftist is. That's always the good thing about a crisis. You find out, people show themselves, and you find out where people really stand, and you find out how strong their politics really are. Basically, what's happening in Afghanistan makes the case against imperialism, against the United States intervening in the affairs of other countries. That is the conclusion that any leftist must reach. Not that, oh, this looks terrible, not we should go back. No, 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 no. Let Afghanistan develop itself. Let people in that country figure out how to manage all of these contradictions, all of these conflicts within their nation. And we must always remember it's the U.S. that gave them the Taliban. So to act like they're the villains now, after hundreds of millions and ultimately trillions of dollars were spent, does people a disservice.
Wow, that's could not have said it better, better myself. And it reminds me of it's amazing how so many left-leaning folks have not just imperial blind spots, and that's a good segue to another thing I wanted to talk to you about, which is also racist blind spots. And they're, you can be a liberal and be a bigot. I used to I used to be I used to be allergic to anyone who just happened to be a Republican and came from the Bible Belt and stuff like that. And then you see in France, people just have this allergy towards people who towards Muslim women who. And I'm not talking about the burqa, and I understand people who are who are against that, but people who just want to wear their headscarf and just it's part of their identity, and they're not imposing any kind of theocracy on it. And yet you have people in France who just have this allergy to it. And then in Canada, the premier of Quebec has this total ban on women wearing the headscarves, and then you see this with and then you see this with China. Now, whatever, and I have my criticisms towards China, and look, Putin, that's the guy I wouldn't vote for, and Iran, yeah, it's a pity that Iran, it's not a secular country. It's a theocracy. But that being said, I just don't understand how people have these imperial racist blind spots. So they're supporting Western-backed racists in Hong Kong, or they're supporting jihadists in Zhejiang, the Uyghurs there, those who want a separate country, and then they're supporting ultra nationalists and Nazis in Ukraine. And I remember Glen Ford in his speech, he'd say, and I'm talking about real Nazis, real white Nazis with swastikas and doing the salutes, and Ukraine now is like the #1 place of Nazi tourism. then I read, Richard Sanders of Canada. He did a historical investigative series on the fact that all of those, Ukrainian civil society groups that we prop up in Canada and the West, and those people in Ukraine who are lionizing Nazi collaborators, those people were runaway Nazis, and those are people who don't have, they're not. They're not only are they not left-leaning groups, but they're not even liberal, and it's just amazing how when you confront people, about this, and they just refuse to acknowledge it, or they say, "Oh, sorry, I know that you guys are really angry about the Iraq War, but this time around, we are supporting the good guys in China, and we're supporting the good guys against, Russia propping up Navalny, who's also a rival oligarch and also a homophobe and all of that." So your thoughts on that? So your thoughts on that?
Well, it's I think most Americans are imperialists, and whatever other differences they may have, they believe in American exceptionalism. They believe in white supremacy, and so they really believe that there is a superiority about the U.S. and European countries. So it's just a matter of something being a mistake. So Iraq was a mistake, or Afghanistan was a mistake because it looks bad on the news these last few days. But they don't see anything wrong with the U.S. deciding who runs Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Iran, and so on and so on. They believe what they're told about other people, that they don't know what they're doing, and these white people. All you need is someone who has a liberal background and who is pro-U.S. That's what's always the best thing, when it's never the best thing. The countries that do best for their people are independent of U.S. influence, or want to be. And so the result is all we hear are lies. Everything you're told about China almost is a lie. And it can't be a perfect country, but I know the U.S. has more of its population in prison. I know China hasn't invaded anybody. I know China committed itself to bringing millions of people out of poverty and creating, as they say, a moderately prosperous society. That's not a goal of either political party in this country. We have homeless people living on the streets everywhere in this country. So whatever is true about China, I've got to find out for myself. And I cannot depend on corporate media or people, liberals who consider themselves smart and superior to others. I can't depend on them because they never tell us the truth. Nobody in the corporate media told you that the so-called protests in Cuba last month were all directed by the CIA. And now they're using black Cubans. It's like, oh, black Cubans, they don't like their government. Well, it's a longer story, but this was all directed from outside. All these tweets came from Spain and Argentina and other countries. People are calling it the Bay of Tweets. It was clearly orchestrated from outside. So that is what you will read in the New York Times, because it is a kind of, how shall I put it?
Even in left-leaning outlets, though, that's the problem. But even in left-leaning outlets.
Yeah, left-leaning, but that's where the rubber meets the road. Who is going to defend the Cuban Revolution? Who is, whatever. This is what I say about black people in Cuba. The most important thing we can do for them is to end sanctions, which are making their lives miserable. And if they have other issues as black people in a country with a history similar to the U.S., then we need to be in solidarity with them. But right now, we must oppose U.S. imperialism. And that is how we know who's a real leftist and who is not. And as far as Iran goes, it's for people in Iran. It's not a left regime. They killed leftists in the late 80s with the help of British intelligence, who fingered the leftists in Iran. So now when you hear about the current Iranian president killing all these people, well, the British helped him do it. That's important to mention.
Exactly.
But the people in Iran have a right to live without U.S. interference, without the U.S. sanctions depriving them of food, depriving them of medicine. That is where leftists should be. We must oppose the U.S. interfering in other countries, interfering in Russia. Russia, who have they invaded? Nobody. Do they have as many people in jail? No. Do their cops have guns? No. So, this idea of this, American superiority, we've got to get rid of it. And the outright lies about the Uyghurs. Nothing you're told about them is true. There aren't any concentration camps. The Uyghurs were targeted by other Islamist groups in Syria, for example. So there were Uyghurs who went to Syria to overthrow Assad, which all happened at the behest of the U.S. And some of them carried out terror attacks back in China. So China made an effort to bring this group in, one of the 50 some odd ethnic groups in China, bring them back into the fold. And they had trade schools where people went home on the weekends. What kind of concentration camp lets you go home on the weekend? I mean, I've never heard of such. So I would like to know more of the truth about the Uyghurs, but I know what we're told is a lie. And the antipathy towards China is because China is now a rival, an economic rival of the U.S. And China was fine as long as they just made cheap stuff that you could buy at Walmart. Nobody had a problem with China. But now China rivals the U.S. And that is something that cannot be allowed. This idea that the U.S. has to be the most powerful country and no one can challenge the U.S. is a very dangerous one. So now China and Russia, in order to protect themselves, have formed a very strong alliance. And they should, because the United States has to be kept in check. When the Soviet Union fell, I mean, it was bad for most of the world. It was bad for us in the U.S. because suddenly we were told, instead of having this left country that we had to say we were better than, any demand we made could just be dismissed as socialism doesn't work. You see how the Soviet Union collapsed. So you don't need a bigger minimum wage. You don't need a safety net. You don't need any of the things that the U.S. went through the motions of providing for people in order to make this case that our country was at least that was better and provided more for its people. So you lost a counterweight to the U.S. abroad. You lost an ideological counterweight here at home.
And now Eastern Europe, and now Eastern Europe, I've had Boyan Stanislavski and Dr. Maria Chernats of The Barricade, which is a pan-Eastern European left-leaning news outlet, and talking to them about Eastern European affairs, it's always very depressing because after the fall of the Eastern Bloc in the USSR, whatever criticisms one may have, but all you see across Eastern Europe is just rival oligarchs, rival far right parties, and now we're weaponizing now we're weaponizing whatever legitimate grievances or whatever non legitimate grievances to have just endless Cold Wars, and these countries all as colonies to NATO and the European Union.
Exactly, absolutely right. They are people who, all these Eastern European states that made up the Warsaw Pact, they are all members of NATO, all members of the EU, and basically they provide cheap labor to the richer European countries, which is a problem because if people in France had a good safety net, and now French companies want to set up shop in Poland where labor is cheaper, that hurts people in France. This new history that the Soviet Union is equally responsible for World War II, as responsible as Hitler was, which is just, I don't know how many different lies you have to tell in order to say that. But they're the poorest countries in Europe. If you look at COVID death rates in Europe, they have the worst rates. They did not benefit from the fall of the Soviet Union, and the rest of the world didn't. There were spheres of influence. So this was the Soviet Union, and the U.S. wasn't going to mess with that country. Now the U.S. thinks it can mess with anybody. And now they're still, what they did in Ukraine, they're trying to do to Belarus, and trying to make us believe that the Belarusian president is the worst man ever. Nobody talked about him until recently, but that's how you know when something's a lie. So gotta read Black Agenda Report, among other outlets, to find out what's going on. And one of the things I'm very proud of with Black Agenda Report, our focus is on Black people around the world, but we write about everything. We write about so many different issues and places around the world.
How much more time do I have with you, Margaret?
5 minutes, 6 minutes.
Okay. Well then. Unfortunately, I'm not going to ask the last question, but I won't ask the question about the whole some of the racist blind spots that some of the largely white socialist left. But we talked last time about how you reject the whole identity politics versus the class struggle debate, and how I should be and how I should have some red flags towards some on the left who do engage in class reductionism and so forth. And can you still hear me, Margaret? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, by accident. I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So, but we won't get into that because, but we'll save that for another show. So before I let you go, Margaret, I know it was your birthday this week, and I have to ask you, and I have to ask you this question. Also in memory of James Lipton, who passed away, who did Inside the Actors Studio. So I'm going to ask you this very quick questionnaire. So first of all, Margaret, what is your favorite words?
My favorite word?
Yeah.
I don't have one. Sorry if I'm smoking. I don't have one.
Okay. What's your least favorite word then?
My least favorite word currently is woke. It's like a word that needs to be excised from the language. It's like a catch-all phrase meant to smear people and to make attacks against any left-wing ideas or initiatives. So that's currently my least favorite word.
What inspires you?
I think the revolutionary struggles that people have had that have succeeded, knowing that the masses of people, especially Black people in this country, led the way, that we can still do that despite the attack on the movement. Everyone claims to be concerned about the climate, but we had a huge environmental movement about 50 years ago when I was a kid. Millions of people protested. It's this movement that got Nixon. Richard Nixon established the Environmental Protection Agency because of this grassroots movement. So we can do that again. And we have to look around the world. So you have to look at what people are doing in Cuba or Nicaragua or Venezuela, or the struggles of people in Haiti, by the way, where there were hundreds of thousands of people protesting, and nobody ever in the corporate media mentioned why, or that there was anything for us to pay attention to, because this country is under the rule of US-backed oligarchs. But at any rate, I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little bit. But it's the struggles of other people that have succeeded.
So people power movements. What turns you off?
Oh my goodness, so many things. Lies, mostly. It's a bit depressing, actually, to know that when most people who want to be well informed, but if you depend on the New York Times and CNN, you don't know anything. That is that's something that makes me sad. But that's why we need left media. That's why what we do is so important.
What sound or noise do you love?
What sound do I love?
What sound or noise do you love?
Little kids laughing. That's the best thing. It's a spontaneous laughter. It's just like magic.
What sound or noise do you hate?
I don't know, sirens living in New York. So many things. Leaf blowers. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I don't know if people in your country use them. It's like, why do we have leaf blowers in New York City? It's not even the suburbs. Anyway, it's the most obnoxious sound.
What's your favorite curse words?
I don't know if I'm not going to curse. I'm an old lady. I'm not going to curse.
Okay.
My curse words are very basic, just to drop in an F-bomb occasionally.
Alrighty. What profession, if you weren't doing yours, would you love to do?
I just want to do what I do here. I can't think of anything else I would rather do.
What profession would you absolutely not want to do under any circumstances?
Oh my God. Well, that's a long list. Anything that hurts other people.
That's a good one.
I couldn't be a bill collector. I couldn't be in the military. I couldn't be a banker. I couldn't be a real estate developer. I couldn't do any of those things.
Same here. The last one before I let you go. Ugh. If heaven exists, what would you like God to say to you as you arrive at the pearly gates?
I don't know. Hi, how you doing? I can't think.
Family Glen and Bruce are waiting for you, or
there you go. And there your mom and dad are over there, and that would be it. But I'd like to concentrate on life, this world, the only one I know of, and trying to make it better. And it may sound corny, but that's what Black Agenda Report has always tried to do.
Well, in this edition of 1+1, we were rejoined by my good friend and our returning champion, Margaret Kimberley. And we have to say rest in peace, rest in power to Glen Ford. Long live his wonderful legacy, as well as Bruce Dixon's legacy, as well as Omar Latif, who I had on the program, who also passed away and pushed back against the propaganda on China.
I do want to mention one thing. The New York Times had an obituary of Glen, which was surprisingly good. I was very wary when I first heard from them. But this New York Times obituary of Glen Ford, it appeared online yesterday, which was August 18th, I believe. So people can look it up. It was tweeted, New York Times Politics. So people can look it up. And it was surprisingly good. So I just want to point that out.
All right, and I can't wait to upload this episode and to do that playlist of all my favorite Glen stuff. Margaret, we hope to have you on the program again, and again, I want to express my deepest sorrows, and you give my best to the team at Black Agenda Report, the team at Black Alliance for Peace, the team at the Black is Back Coalition, and all of the and of course all of your fellow comrades and friends and families who are all mourning the loss of the Peter Tosh Felakuti of journalism, Glen Ford.
I love that, Peter Tosh Felakuti of journalism. Well, Glen, since you reached out to him, he's the one who brought us together. So I thank you. Thank you very much.
All righty. Well, you give my best, and as Glen would always say, power to the people, death to the imperialist fascist pigs.
Peace out.